Good morning, guys, and welcome back to another episode of your Brains Coach podcast. My name is Angela Shurina. I'm your host. I'm your Brains Coach, and it is my job here to bring to you all the best, cutting-edge, most recent, interesting, and fascinating brain-body tools so you could feel, look, and do your absolute best by learning how to operate this most sophisticated computer in the entire universe, your brain. Today, guys, I'm so excited because on our podcast, we have a guest. Professor Gena Gorlin is joining me. She is a professor of clinical psychology, founder, coach, living in Austin, where she emigrated a long time ago as a young girl with her family from Odessa, Ukraine. And I'm very excited for Gena to be joining me today because her work, for me personally, when I discovered her work, it was really important thing. Her work gave me a needed scaffolding and structure for not just my work, my passions, my interests, but also for my life, my mindset, and my almost character and personality of a builder. And you'll understand on this podcast what I mean by the word builder. But more about Gena before we jump into our discussion, our conversation that I promise you're going to find very useful, practical, and you're going to learn a lot about yourself as a builder, as a founder of this world. So Gena has always been a lot into arts, and in her previous life even considered becoming an opera singer before jumping fully into pursuing double major in clinical psychology, in psychology and philosophy, and then she got her PhD in clinical psychology. And now Gena is dedicating herself, her work, her maybe not entirely live, but she's very passionate about building the builders of this world. Specifically in her work, she focuses on founders, but she believes a builder is anyone who is taking an active part in shaping their life and the world around them. Gena is obsessed with understanding how the mind of the builder works. What are their psychological needs? What are psychological needs of extremely ambitious? Gena is obsessed with finding and learning and creating the best tools and strategies to help the most audacious people of our world to succeed on their mission and to also thrive personally with their unique work-life balance and unique set of priorities both in personal and professional life. This conversation, folks, it's gonna be about psychology and about the mindset and about different dilemmas that founders, builders, and a lot of us, again, taking more active participation in our life are faced with every day when we have to be hyper realistic, when we have to accept the life as it is. But also, if we want to shape this world and change things for the better, we also have to be extremely hopeful. And sometimes for a lot of people, even feel seemingly almost crazy and almost delusional for a lot of people. We have to create something out of nothing. And so that creates a whole range of unique psychological needs and traits and dilemmas and contradictions that we need to address if we want to thrive, if we want to change the world, make the world better, and if we want to have a meaningful life experience. But enough of introductions. Without further ado, please enjoy our wide-ranging conversation with Gena about the insights and navigation of builders' mind. Gena, welcome to your Brains Coach podcast. I'm so excited and happy to have you on.
Very much. Likewise, really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Again, super excited to explore the topic that I got so passionate about. um, partially, my passion grew even more because of you, because you gave it such a nice scaffolding and framework.
Well, thank you.
Um, well,
Means a
let's
lot
begin.
to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Let's begin. Let's tell our listeners about your background a little bit. So I dug into your biography on different websites. Well, your website was also a good place to do that. And you mentioned there that you either started or were passionate about a career of opera singer.
Yep.
And then
You did do your
somehow,
digging. Nice work. Yeah. So you went back to those roots. Yes. I have always been the sort who wants to bite off more than I can perhaps chew. I have always been
Mhm,
ambitious, and sometimes I've needed to try the hard thing, even if just to eliminate it, just to know that I tried. And so, but growing up, I was both uh, an artist. I was very
mhm,
musical in particular. So I sang, I played violin for 10 plus years, played in international youth symphonies, and eventually really specialized in classical voice.
mhm.
And I was extremely intellectual and wrote essays for essay contests. And you can imagine I was not very popular, in middle and high school. So, but we can we can always get into that separately. So I was pretty serious about my vocal training. And at
Mhm,
the same time, I knew I wouldn't be content just getting a conservatory degree where that's all I'm doing and everyone
mhm,
around me is just, talking music and playing music all the time. I knew I also wanted to study psychology and philosophy, and I was too intellectually curious to let that go. So
mhm,
I decided I was going to do both. So it turns out there's such a thing as a dual degree program that allows you to both simultaneously work toward a
mhm,
Bachelor of Music at a conservatory and a
mhm,
Bachelor of Arts or Sciences at a normal, university.
mhm.
So I tried and did that for a little while at the New England Conservatory, which had a dual degree program with Tufts University. And I went, I think, a good year and a half before realizing that I was being insane and probably should just let one go. And so the opera is what went.
Okay. And
A
then it
lot more
seems
of that
like
story
you,
if you want.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, if you have interesting stories to share, please feel free
I
to
mean, we have an
volunteer.
hour,
And
so I'll
yeah,
I'll try to I'll
yes. But then you
moderate.
seem to get a double the major, as I understood it, in psychology and philosophy.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, I wasn't just going to do one thing. Let's be serious. Yeah, so I double majored in those two majors, as you mentioned,
Mhm,
and ended up with, weirdly enough, a Bachelor of Science because I had taken
mhm.
whatever neuroscience class would qualify the psychology degree as a science
Yeah.
degree, and I got the philosophy double major as well.
And what did you, I guess, begin be, what did begin this interest in psychology and philosophy, so much so that you decided to pursue it, full time, and then dug in even deeper into clinical psychology and
Mhm.
got your PhD there. So yeah, how did it start?
Sure. Oh my gosh. I mean, we'd have to go way back. So I mean, I kept a diary all through probably from when I was, I don't know, 9, 10 through roughly high school when I got too busy and was writing too many other, papers and
Mhm,
essays, and I got to self-reflect in other forms. But I was always extremely introspective. I
mhm,
was a lonely kid, as has
mhm,
been briefly referenced. I was always fascinated by the human psyche, both my own, uh, as psychologists will often kind of start with as a reference point,
mhm.
right? Research is me search, et cetera.
Yeah.
Um, but also my friends, when I did have friends and when I connected to people, it was around being able to really kind of dig into their motivations, being able to kind of ask
Mhm,
questions about why they were doing what they were doing or about what they were sort of torn or conflicted about. And characters that I would read about, I also loved. I kind of absorbed a lot of fiction and a lot of literature growing up.
mhm,
And some of that got me even more explicitly into, oh, there are these philosophical perspectives that inform the different ways that characters live or comport themselves. I got into
mhm,
everyone from like Victor Hugo. I read Ayn Rand famously or notoriously, when I was a teenager, I read a lot of esoteric stuff like Jack London's Martin Eden, Summer of My German Soldier. There was just such a kind of rich library in retrospect of like different ways of living that I took some form of inspiration from, or that I took solace from in some cases. Like, okay, I'm not alone. I had a Borges phase. I don't know if you've ever encountered Borges.
Yes, I did, but I did not read a lot of him.
That's okay. I'm not actually recommending. I just remember that for a while it was like I very specifically resonated with this like dark complexity that almost no one appreciates, but that, if you can appreciate it, then it's like it unlocks this whole nother realm. I don't even really remember any of the, I couldn't tell you what any of the stories actually were about. I just remember how I felt, how I responded to them. In any case, by the time I was applying to college programs, I knew that I loved studying ideas, philosophical ideas, but that what was interesting to me about them really was how they animate human beings. And I also longed for connection. Again, as a lonely, nerdy, socially awkward, poorly assimilated immigrant kid who really wanted to connect, but without kind of compromising my soul. Like in a way, I wanted to connect authentically, on the basis of shared thought and shared, but like, kind of independent thinking that we could ignite in each other and kind of learn from and thought partner on, rather than what I used to call like Abercrombie and Fitch zombies, who like the kids who wore designer clothes. And I associated that with being like a soulless kind of like lemming, like you just do what everybody else does and you just kind of mindlessly go through life. I knew I didn't want that. I knew I wanted to retain and to nurture my intellect, my soul, my spirit. And I wanted to do that in a way that was rigorous and secular. Like I was never really religious, didn't really grow up religious. And so it was very much about understanding the kind of interface of the science and the philosophy of the human psyche, and psychology and philosophy gave me that mix.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Yeah, I can also relate to how literature can shape your personality and character and mindset for basically probably your entire life. I, also I finished high school and we had like divisions, literature and language, or mathematics and science, etc. So I was in literature and languages, and yes, grew up and yes, exactly. Yeah. And people even now tell me like, you talk like those, literature texts, like in long sentences, like can you shorten it?
Well, you and I we are simpatico in that way, which also means that this podcast will have many long sentences and few short ones, because there's not going to be anyone to check us on that. But yes, very much.
I can see, yes, how it shaped your journey towards the psychology and philosophy. But then when it comes to, it seems like you worked as a clinical psychologist, and then you transitioned to coaching. And I'm not sure if you do it full time or you do both at the same time. And you transitioned.
I can never just do one thing. So we'll get into that. Yes.
So how did you
I do still do some, clinical psychology just to clarify that, because that isn't, that's not one of the cases where, like with the opera pursuit, I just divorced opera, right? And it felt like a divorce, where here I will always be a clinical psychologist, at least, in the foreseeable future. And I've both expanded and specialized. So the way I think about it isn't so much, I transitioned from being a psychologist to being a coach. It's more so that I have come to better understand and refine my expertise as a psychologist, my specialty area as a psychologist. I'm interested in the psychology of ambition, of innovation, of entrepreneurship. And so it turns out the best and easiest way to connect with ambitious innovators around the ventures that they're pursuing that bring up all the kinds of psychological challenges I'm interested in is actually to be a coach. Because that's much less limiting. And, I can work much more broadly with founders individually and in teams across state lines. It's not the kind of like medicalized service that therapy still is.
Yeah, like where you have a lot more is regulations and boundaries.
Oh yeah.
When I was getting certified as a coach, they explained us really well. So this is what you do as a coach, and yeah, you can dabble into a lot of things, but also you don't dabble into like becoming a therapist or yeah.
Unless you really want to do a lot more school and
Yes.
spend a lot more time, yes, on various kinds of training. Yeah, but I've done all
Yeah.
that. So I kind of, I try to take advantage of having these things in my wheelhouse.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'm sure they give you also like a much deeper understanding and perspective on also coaching side of things and how say why people do certain things like
I think they
in
give
life
you,
and in business.
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily, they also teach you a lot of stuff that is wrong or will turn out to be wrong. And
Mm,
they teach you a bunch of conflicting schools of therapy and schools of thought.
okay.
And so I think how deep you really go in assimilating all that and
Hmm.
turning it into an actionable framework is
Hmm.
largely up to every individual student,
Mm,
every individual psychologist. And I now teach graduate students in psychology how to do therapy. And so I think about this all
okay.
the time. What are we actually teaching? And how do we
Hmm.
help students to really go deep or to kind of become their own self supervisors, I call it, like how to get them to the point where when they graduate and then eventually pass their EPPP exam and get all their
Hmm.
supervised therapy hours in order to get licensed, like actually they've amassed a body of knowledge that is internalized, that they can use in flexible, appropriate ways
Hmm.
for the vast range of circumstances and individuals
Hmm.
they'll encounter.
Hmm.
Because I don't actually
Yeah.
think that's at all automatic to the training or to
Yeah.
any form of
Yeah.
training.
I guess training is still, especially in sciences, I guess, um, a lot more a lot more theoretical than practical, and helping perhaps people to form their own frameworks and practices and business models, etc.
Yeah.
Um, uh,
And
b-
yeah,
yeah,
sorry,
I
go on.
wanted to ask you now about you transitioned to when it comes to coaching, you started to do a very specific kind of coaching, and that's what got me really interested in your work. Um, you transitioned or focused more on coaching ambitious founders, entrepreneurs, what you
Yeah,
call builders. So could you expand more on that? Like what exactly it um, looks like for you? Like who do you exactly coach, and who are those people builders? Like what's your definition? What's
sure.
what's what
Oh
does it
yeah.
mean to a person who never heard about this term?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I could so easily just spill the rest of our hour answering that question, but please don't let me do that. I'll try to be focused. So I can, if I can take those questions in reverse order, because they're kind
Yeah,
of
sure.
building on each other. So what do I mean by a builder
Hmm.
for someone who hasn't read my stuff? So I mean something pretty particular, but so because I know the term connotes a lot of things to a lot of people.
Hmm.
What I mean by it is any human who is actively engaged in making valuable things as
Hmm.
as part of a contribution to the world and to their own lives, and fundamentally someone who approaches their own life as a project of
Hmm.
building, in the sense that like they're in charge of deciding the kind of life they want to live. They're in charge of kind of choosing what kind of work will I do and how much time will I spend on it and who am I going to collaborate with and who will I have around me in my personal life and what if do I want to parent and what kind of parent will I be, and like they're entrepreneurial, which
Hmm.
is I think it's an adjective that I think connotes something very similar to what being a builder connotes
Hmm.
to me. They approach their life as if they're in charge of it. Right, like I'm building this life, I'm creating it, and as part of that, and what I think is really essential psychologically and sort of existentially to building a great human life is you
Hmm.
like you have to produce, or you've got to somehow like you've got to create value. You've got to use your effort and your intelligence to actually shape the world around you, to bring things into the world, whether
Hmm.
that's through the ways that like what am I building? I'm building a set of ideas and a set of tools that I, hope and that I go out and test to make sure will actually make people's lives better and specifically will empower more builders to build, right?
Hmm.
So it's not like I'm building some like physical structure,
Yeah.
right? Or like a product in some narrow sense. I'm building a framework. I'm building a set of ideas, right? Some people are building a culture. Some people are building an approach to get like running a system, right? Some people, they're working in a factory or they're working, at McDonald's, and what they're building is a customer experience, right? By doing a really good job at whatever they're, at interacting with the customer who comes, or, if they're driving an Uber, what if they're, yeah, if they're driving for Uber, like, they're building a sentence, which sometimes is the toughest thing of all, right? Like they're creating a means for people to get around, and they're putting and they're being thoughtful about it, we hope, in terms of like connecting with the customer or noticing whether the customer wants to talk or to just sit quietly, right? And they're sort of they're making sure that the route that their GPS navigator is giving them actually makes sense. So in other words, I don't actually think of this as just being like a niche concept that only applies to certain really ambitious people. I actually think of it as a framework for living that every human being would do well to pay attention to. That's a pretty, grandiloquent statement. Like, I actually think what I'm saying applies to all humans, but I actually kind of do think that.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm hearing is, for you, builder is someone who decides to actively participate in life,
Yes.
like whether that's
beautifully put. That's really nicely summarized. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I also believe that it's mindset. So sometimes we might be more passive, but I noticed that I myself personally, and people around me and people I work with, they're more fulfilled when they actively participate in creation of the experience for themselves and for other people, instead of taking it as it is, right?
Exactly. Yeah, really. Yeah, nicely put. I haven't answered your first question, which was about how did I hone in on this population, given that I'm saying there's this universal concept that applies to all humans. The reason that I've gotten increasingly, interested in and specialized in founders is that I think they've chosen a path that necessarily exemplifies and necessitates developing that builder's mindset that I ultimately think is good for all of us, to the extent of our ambitiousness, or or within whatever our scope. But it's a lot less obvious when we're doing something where it's pretty easy to just coast, right? Like we have an employer who tells us what to do. We have a script. We have pretty clear instructions on how to drive the car, or how to, dispense the coffee, or whatever. And so it's not as obvious there. Like, you're not face to face with, I think, like the forces of life, the universe, and everything that kind of compel human beings to create. Whereas a founder, there's no playbook, there's no boss, there are no safety, nets if they screw up or if they delude themselves about there being a market for what they're building, right? Like, they're it. The buck stops with them. And to me, like, what they're doing is therefore kind of the essence. It's like, if I can help them do that, then I think I can help anyone do anything. If that makes sense.
It makes sense. And, I read a couple of your other articles. One is Psychological Needs of Extremely Ambitious. The other one was about psychological perfection. And I believe in Psychological Perfection article, you mentioned this concept of ceiling raising. And I believe that, working with founders allow you to impact that better. Because I believe, as you said, like, founders exemplify that idea of building, of creating better than any other population, that
at least maybe more obviously so.
Yeah.
Right. It's sort of blatant in a bunch of different ways. I mean, it's definitely also true, for writers, for artists, for anyone, to the extent of kind of them trying to contribute actively to their lives. But there's a kind of unique set of conditions, right, under which founders are choosing to operate. And I think in this historical moment, like where
Mm-hmm.
we may well see a time where that's also been pretty templatized, where, yeah, like you follow this recipe and, you apply to get VC funds and you get matched to your VCs who will now fund your company, and it's all kind of boilerplated. And you can even see movement in that direction with
Mm-hmm.
like accelerators, right? With YC having a program, but it's far from the point where now it's cookie cutter, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you need to be able to initiate, you need to be able to conceive of your own vision and roadmap. You need to be able to
Mm-hmm.
think for yourself in first principles about the kind of company you want to be and the kind of problem you want to solve. And by
Mm-hmm.
definition, to be a fast growing startup, you have to do something new. So like
Yeah.
no one will have done it. No one will have solved this problem like you're going to solve it, or at least as well as you're going to solve it, if you want to be able to make money off of it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
And with that, what I read in your work, and I listen to some of your podcasts. Also, with that, there comes a specific set of like dilemmas and psychological needs and mindset sort of skills that founders have to master and have to
yeah.
adjust in order to succeed on this journey. And what I also believe you're saying is that, and if they can learn to master it, then the rest of us would have pretty good model of how to do that.
Yeah. And we'd also just all be better off because they're the ones driving innovation and progress, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
they're the ones who are going to supply us with the app that allows us to manage our mental health better. And they're the ones, or not, because they'll fail and they'll get burnt out and they
Mm-hmm.
won't be able to see through that, really hard, ambitious vision, or they'll end up, falling into any of the many kind of traps, including many psychological traps
Yeah.
that like they'll have a lot of built up relationship debt with their co-founder, and eventually the resentment will grow and the misalignment will grow to the point where the bubble
Mm-hmm.
bursts and then the company just gets torn apart and sold off to private equity, which then makes it something lame. Yeah. So we're all better off
Mm-hmm.
the better we can support those most ambitious innovators who
Yeah.
are driving humanity forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess not just driving humanity in a technological kind of way, but also psychological kind of way, right?
Right. That's my
Teaching
hope.
us how to navigate those extremes on founder's journey, entrepreneurial journey, innovator's journey. And I believe
Yeah.
if I don't know if you agree with me that founder's journey is unique in that way that founders choose to live on those extremes.
Yes.
Give you an example personally. Yesterday, I participated in mastermind that we have every couple of weeks. We get together with like a group of people here. And so I was presenting a topic about a founder's mindset. And the first thing I decided to talk about was how founders, we need to have low expectations of life, meaning things will go wrong, things will break,
Mm.
right? Things will
Hmm.
not go according to the plan. And that's what kind of life is and our journey. But then, another person told me, but how
Hmm.
about like high hopes and aspirations? And you want to believe that you can change the world and the things
Yeah.
will work out. What do you do with that? Like,
Yeah. So
right?
I have a lot of thoughts on, I mean, you're kind of tapping into a topic that I have had on my mind quite a lot, especially because there are these competing schools of thought. And someone tweeted recently about there was a kind of impactful tweet about these two seemingly paradoxical messages that founders get. One is
Mm-hmm.
happiness equals expectations minus reality. So like set your
Mm-hmm.
expectations low, kind of like what you were
Yeah.
saying. The other one being shoot for the moon. Don't
Yeah.
undersell yourself, right? Like you're gonna need to, the higher your aspiration, the higher your bar, the higher you have a chance to get right. And that, like, as a founder, it's very easy to undercut your own ambition. It's very easy
Mm-hmm.
to actually kind of undersell, and all the pressures of society, like all the messaging you're going to get around you will tend to be in the shrinking direction of like, what are you
Mm-hmm.
talking about? You're
Yeah.
crazy. Well, how do you, no one else is that, like, you're going to be the one who like builds the chat bot that can actually talk to us like we're people, like, or like it's human, like, come on,
Mm-hmm.
everyone since Turing has tried, like, or whatever the case may be. And the fact is that not only do you have to be ambitious, so I write about this in a piece on my Substack, Vision versus Delusion, why
Mm-hmm.
ambitious founders need self-trust. Like, you don't just, it's not enough to like have really, really high expectations, but like in a delusional way. That doesn't
Mm-hmm.
work. Everyone has those. Everyone's, it's really easy. Well, I'm going to be a famous rock star. I'm going to fly to the moon. I'm going to, you name it. Sure. Yeah, me too. Like we can all hope that somehow magically that happens. But the really ambitious founders who actually make things happen, they're doing something way harder than that. They're actually holding themselves accountable to like, what is a belief that's founded in
Mm-hmm.
evidence and my knowledge of the world? And it's a belief, not necessarily, and it can't be like I'll definitely succeed at building this because you just can't, there's too much, noise, right, on
Yeah.
that path in terms of like, of the particular ways you think you'll be able to do it or the particular timeline. But like Jeff Bezos saying back in whatever, whatever it was that he quit his cushy finance job and started
Mm-hmm.
Amazon. Jeff Bezos saying, the internet will change everything. It will
Mm-hmm.
certainly change how people transact. It'll
Mm-hmm.
change, the economy. It'll change commerce. It'll change the nature of human interaction. I'm going to go and be a part of that because that's going to be huge. Like this is a
Mm-hmm.
game-changing opportunity to be part of something where like the world will look completely different than it does today in my
Mm-hmm.
lifetime. That was legit, right? Like that wasn't delusion. Like he knew what
Mm-hmm.
he had read the signs, right? Like he had
Mm-hmm.
seen the trend and he understood something that most other people didn't understand, or at least didn't have the kind of courage and conviction to go and act upon. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how he became one of the richest, people in the world. So that's very different from, well, like at least you can hope.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So,
Anyway.
I wanted to ask you, do you have any specific maybe tools, exercises that people can take themselves through either in writing or, just thinking about that to make sure that when they shoot for the moon, they're also grounded in reality, not just delusional?
Yeah. So I have a bunch of stuff. So, and it all kind of goes together. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm working on a book. So at some point, I'll just be
Cool.
able to say, yes, read chapters 4 through 5, But for now, it's all still kind of all over the place. So there are a few places. So the vision versus delusion piece I mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
it's a two-parter. And the second part,
Mm-hmm.
it at least has a kind of outline of common areas to check for, kind of
Mm-hmm.
places where we, and especially founders, tend to self-deceive. And that can include both, oh, well, I've already validated this with enough customers, and so I can go ahead and, pitch it to investors, or I can go ahead and
Mm-hmm.
build my product on the one side. Or it could also be, no, we've invalidated this idea. There's just, we've talked to 2 people who gave us really scathing feedback, so it must be bad. But really, I just don't want to have to expose myself to more scathing feedback. That's the
Mm-hmm.
real reason I'm quitting. So it kind of provides some concrete checks that
Mm-hmm.
I've seen come up a lot in especially early stage entrepreneurs. So
Okay.
kind of reading through that. And then it also links to a piece I wrote for Psychology Today called
Mm-hmm.
5 Steps to Earning Your Own Trust.
Yeah.
And that piece literally has, if you're looking for like a worksheet type of
Mm-hmm.
exercise, like, steps to go through, questions to ask yourself,
Mm-hmm.
that's the closest thing to it. And the specific focus of that one is how to build your own self-credibility by
Mm-hmm.
kind of checking in with yourself about what are the lies you might be telling, kind of what are the self-deceptions, which I think has to kind of go hand in hand with upsizing your ambition, because
Yeah.
the higher your ambition, the more opportunities for self-deception there are,
Yeah.
and kind of the more you need to be anchored to reality.
Yeah, I'm gonna link those two pieces. I actually read both of them.
Oh,
And I remember,
that's
yeah, there was
nice.
those checks. But it also, you mentioned there is, a small detail that the higher your like ambition, the more chances you have to be self-delusional. I also believe that if you get some successes, you get even more chances to be
Oh, yeah.
self-delusional.
Oh, for
So you
sure.
really have to
Yeah.
have some
That
process.
opportunity never goes away. Yeah. Yeah. But
Yeah.
also when you fail, like it's both the case. So this has come up with a lot of founders of late.
Hmm.
This idea, I think it was whoever the CEO of Spotify, the founder and CEO of
Hmm.
Spotify said at some point, look, if I knew how hard it would be when I started, I wouldn't have done it.
Hmm.
And so,
Hmm.
so there's this idea among founders like that you need this naivete of like, well, I've never failed. I don't, it's like I don't even
Hmm.
know what I'm getting myself into, and so I'm just gonna go. Just gonna plow forth, and like pitch this crazy ambitious idea because I don't know the pain that I'm in
Hmm.
for. And I think there's something to that, but I think like the something is, yeah, you don't know the pain you're in for, but like you also don't have a really robust model of the ups or the downs
Hmm.
when you're starting. And I think a lot of people a lot of early stage startup founders, like they fail precisely because they don't anticipate those ups and downs. And when they
Hmm.
get hit, whether that's with a success or a failure, it just knocks them on their side, right? Like, and
Hmm.
they don't have that sort of built up resilience, partly because they just weren't expecting, they didn't see it coming. And so,
Hmm.
the fact is that whoever is the founder and CEO of Spotify, I should remember his name, like, pretty sure he's still in the game, pretty sure he's
Hmm.
lived to found another day. And certainly that's true of most of the successful founders who have failed a bunch, succeeded once or twice, right?
Hmm.
And then went on to kind of more and bigger.
Yeah. And actually today I was going through some threads, social media of some of the founders, like Russell Brunson of ClickFunnels, Alex Hormozy, and his acquisition, and a few others. And they were all talking about what I believe seasoned founders kind of at some point had to learn, that reality will be hard. You'll fail a lot, and a lot of things will not work out. And you kind of have to accept this and make peace with that. And then whenever something happens, you're not going to be disappointed. And that's what I believe that's like having low expectations actually means.
Yeah.
Like,
That's what's interesting. Like, is that having low expectations, or is
or,
that understanding what it looks like to pursue extremely high
yeah,
expectations? Do
yeah,
you know what I mean? Because
yeah,
like it doesn't have to be that hard. Like if
yeah,
you actually just have like my expectation is I'll be able to put a roof over my head,
yeah,
but just barely. Okay, well, I think I can, sure there'll be some
yeah.
setbacks if I like get really sick or if the economy totally tanks. But by and large, like I can hold down a job,
Hmm.
as a whatever, like in an
Yeah,
office. Or I can, like, sure, right? I mean, it's not going to be that hard
yeah.
life's going to be hard, no matter. I don't want to imply, right, that it's not going to still,
Hmm.
that you won't still encounter challenges and have curveballs. COVID taught us that in a big way, I think, which is a big
Yeah.
part of kind of what got me started in this direction of working with founders. But
Mm.
like having low expectations, I don't think that it actually like I don't think it really captures. And I think it's a
Yeah.
kind of, mixed, like it packages together something that is very important for founders to know, which is what you're
Hmm.
talking about. Like it's going to be really hard and you're going to fail a
Hmm.
bunch and growth will not be linear and straightforward. And there will, you will have many, many consecutive nights of just like where you're just not going to be sleeping because either you'll be so preoccupied with whether you'll be able to raise these funds by next week before having to lay everyone off, or like
Hmm.
they need to
Yeah.
know the reality of what they're signing up for because it's really
Yeah.
hard. But the reason it's really hard is because they're shooting for something
Yes. Really
really
hard.
ambitious. And the
Yeah.
question is like, is it worth it to you? Right? Like
Yeah.
how high are you willing to shoot given what it means, given what it will cost?
Yeah.
Right.
I do, I spent quite a lot of my time as a coach being in fitness, nutrition, like working with athletes. And that actually brings this idea home in a much more like physical, tangible way. Because if you're an athlete, if you're shooting for becoming like the best, the first, the top, those people not deluding themselves. They're like, I'll have to work extra hard and
If
barely
that's
have
real,
any.
like, yeah, it's like, it's like understand your expectations and take them seriously. Like, I think that's really the advice, right? It's not like
Yeah.
keep your expectations low. It's like understand what you're choosing, right? Like
Yeah.
understand what you're signing up for in all of its causal complexity, and then decide, do you want that? Including
Yeah.
all the work it takes, including all the chances of failure, including all, the pain and risk along the way. Like, that's the choice. And it is a choice. I think that's a really
Yeah.
big part of what I want to capture.
Exactly. Yeah, I believe in psychological perfection. You said something about radical acceptance, and I believe that's actually what I was like looking for,
Yeah,
maybe the word or the term, like accepting what you actually are choosing. It was the whole package, not just the shiny
exactly.
part of it. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
that's so cool. Even now I understood like it's so much better and fuller, and probably going to be phrasing it much better.
Oh,
Um,
I mean,
but
I'm sure I'll
thank you.
phrase it very differently in another year. So TBD.
But still,
Evolve.
your writing helps a lot, and how you also explain it now. Um, I also wanted to mention a couple of other like contradictory sort of dilemmas founders might be facing, and I definitely personally face them. Like for example, you mentioned that acceptance of the fact that you very often will have to work harder than anyone else, than a lot of people around you, and you will have to sacrifice self-care. But then at the
Yeah,
same time, when time permits and you have some space, you actually have to be very diligent about self-care to build up that reserves that then you can use into fueling your vision.
absolutely. Yeah. So this is a great question. I think there is a way of thinking about this that is paradoxical, or that kind of sets up a contradiction, just like the expectations thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad you're kind of putting that frame on it already. Of there's a way, it's like self versus company is that
Mm-hmm.
I think a really common
Yeah.
way that people experience it. And it's so like, so do you choose to take care of yourself, or do you give up some of yourself, some of your health, some of your well-being, some of your fun, whatever, some of your other needs, so that your company can thrive?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the core problem that makes that whole experience a constant, unsolvable challenge for founders is that it's a false dichotomy.
How
It's
so?
not self versus company. If
Mm-hmm.
your company is against you, in the sense of like the life you want to build for yourself, your best life, your
Mm-hmm.
fully lived, flourishing, joyful, happy, meaningful life. If your company is at the cost of that, don't do it. Period.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, if your company is a project that makes your life richer, better, that's part of the experience you want out of life,
Mm-hmm.
do it, give it all you've got. And that kind of project will be costly. It will take a lot out of you. You'll be trading it off against a lot of things that other people value more. And you've got to
Mm-hmm.
decide, what do you value more? Right.
Yeah.
So if it's a sacrifice, like if having to say no to a lot of social gatherings and, put in long hours at the office and,
Mm-hmm.
have most of your friends be other founders and, have a partner either who's really, really excited by what you're doing and supportive of it, or not having a partner at all. Like, if that life is a sacrifice for you,
Mm-hmm.
don't do it. You will
Yeah.
burn out. Bad
Mm-hmm.
idea. There are lots of other ways to live. Not everyone should be a founder. I'm not a founder,
Yeah.
right? Certainly not at this time in my life. However, the founders who really see it through, the founders who are career founders, and we see, them
Mm-hmm.
coming back to this again and again and thriving in it. That is exactly the life they want. And it is what
Yeah.
nurtures them more than anything else possibly could. And they also have a lot of psychological needs, some of which will resemble the kind of self-care that we worry about founders sacrificing. Like sometimes, yeah, they need to just have blocked out times where it's just like unplugging from work. Nobody can contact them. They're just
Mm-hmm.
going to go take a walk. They're just going to go listen to music. They're just going to go climb, do the
Mm-hmm.
thing that nurtures them. They absolutely will still need those things, not just for themselves, but to be able to run their company. Because if they
Mm-hmm.
don't stay charged, if they don't stay fueled, they're going to suck at leading their team. They're going to make
Yeah.
poor decisions. They're going to get reactive and impulsive and irritable. Like, they will kill their company because they are their own first employee, investor, co-founder, stakeholder, like they're the
Hmm.
foundation of the whole thing.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean. Like you can't actually tear those things asunder. And if you think of it all as one thing, your life,
Hmm.
then there's no contradiction at all. It's like, what's more important to you, given how this would impact, like, is the time you'd be putting into fundraising this week more important to you, all things considered,
Yeah.
and affordable to you in terms of whatever it will cost your family dynamic or your, mental stability, uh, versus how you would otherwise use that time to recharge. In which case, okay, well, who are you gonna, you know, outsource this to? Can you afford
Hmm.
that hit? Can you do another month of, do you have that runway, right? And or like, how are you
Hmm.
going to sort of um, budget in the runway to give yourself those opportunities to rest, which you're going to need?
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that, yeah, just becomes a lot more aligned.
Yeah, and two things that you reminded me of while you were explaining, answering my question is that
And I just went on and on there.
founders, no, but it's really good. It's kind of brought up what I wanted to talk about. This idea that, for example, work-life balance that is talked so much about, everywhere in the media, like you
I
should,
hate that phrase.
take your days. Yeah, and I'm
Yeah, it's
like,
like work versus life. So like your work isn't part of, right? I hate that phrase so much. But yes,
but
go on.
even founders, like seasoned founders, entrepreneurs, they'll talk not about
Oh, yeah,
this some balance that for everyone is different first, but also
right.
priorities, like, and what makes you happy. And that also reminded me of Gary Vee. Always talks about, like, yeah, for me, my work makes me the happiest. I don't want to go skiing and
Right. Like
surfing.
that's a real thing. Like for some people, at least some of the time, for certain projects that they're really on about and excited for, they would actually rather do that work than go skiing. For me, I would rather do almost anything than go skiing. But again,
Yeah,
that's
but
personal
but that's
matter.
exactly right. But this work-life balance, it's more about like priorities and what balance is for you, and that also changes, right? So what balance for me, like this week, might not be balance for me for the next week, right?
Exactly.
Or
Exactly. Yeah.
and you also, while talking about all these things that founders going to have to be aware of, when to take rest, when to go fully in, it made me think about self-awareness. And you also mentioned that in your writing, how the founder also, they have to be very self-aware to make those choices about priorities, but also, or not also, and also they have to understand where they lack
Good. I like
things.
that correction. Yeah. Yeah. Nice.
So, and can you speak
Yeah.
more about that? How, yeah, this also seemingly contradiction, but actually not. Like you have to be self-aware and respect who you are, but you also have to understand where you lack and where you have to improve and change because of where you see yourself, you're going, or your vision, like what you need to become yourself in order to be a good fit
Yeah.
for that.
So let me see if I can set it up as a contradiction more in my
Yeah.
mind, because to me that sounds so congruent that it's hard for me to even like
Yeah.
fathom the contradiction that I will then refute. So let me see. So is the contradiction that you have to be really confident as a founder on the one
Yes. Yeah,
hand,
exactly.
right?
In who
Like
you
you
are,
believe in
where you stand.
yourself
Yeah.
and you can sell you're the person to build this company and, aren't you great?
Yeah.
And you have to be really self-aware about your lacks and your
Yeah.
weaknesses and your areas of growth, right? So yeah, so that can feel contradictory for
Hmm.
sure. And again, like I mean, a big part of this, I think, is we've all heard of the idea of the growth mindset. I think it
Hmm.
is really a profound insight from my colleague Carol Dweck,
Yeah.
into a really important kind of fundamental difference in how we see ourselves in the world that can then have so many downstream effects on our resilience and our kind of like our motivations, how we think about ourselves, and I think it really fits nicely with the builder's mindset as I've been thinking about
Hmm.
it, that if you think of yourself and your life as this building project,
Hmm.
it's especially, and your life being like the whole span of your life that you have to kind of do what you will with, right? To make the most of. Like as long as you're alive, presumably you're working on this project, right?
Yeah.
And if you get to a point where the work is done that's bummer. Like, now what? Right? Like, what do you have left? What do you have left to actively participate in? Right. And so founders, where they derive a lot of their confidence, or where they need to derive a lot of their confidence, is in being on that kind of growth trajectory all the time. And like, part of what that means, like, if you really kind of fundamentally internalize that perspective of what's great about me, the reason investors should invest in me. And by the way, good investors know this and look for this. They don't want the founder who's already right about everything, or knows everything, or has every answer to every part. Like, BS. Nobody believes that, right? Or who has no like chinks in their armor. Like, they want to invest in the founders who are profoundly self-aware and have a perspective on how they're going to be both addressing those weaknesses or overcoming those weaknesses, and compensating, who they're going to hire, or how their co-founder is going to complement them on those weaknesses, right? Or they have plans in place for continued growth and improvement on those aspects of, their skill set or their psychology or whatever, right? Like, everyone knows that everyone has these weaknesses. And so to the extent that you're kind of suppressing them, or trying to paint some sort of, like, Pollyanna-ish kind of fake rosy picture of your infallibility, or your like all-knowingness, you know it's bullshit. Everyone else knows it's bullshit. And so it doesn't breed real confidence. It actually, I would say, it does the opposite. It actually breeds a lot of imposter syndrome and a lot of self-doubt, right? Where the only genuine source of confidence is like, I know I have a proven track record of genuinely like acknowledging when I screw something up and learning from it and correcting it. Like, I can trust myself to do that, right? Which is why I talk about self-trust as almost the more fundamental thing you need.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to make sure to also link this resource prominently so people could work on it.
Cool.
But yes, I agree with you that when I feel the most confident is when I acknowledge the fact that, yes, I'm not perfect, but whatever I'm lacking, I'm going to keep working on it till it gets better. Not perfect, but I'm going to get better.
Yeah. And I have this like idea of perfection in this weird sense that I know isn't the hill I think I need to die on, but like, not perfect in some like platonic ideal sense of some like inherently impossible and kind of inhuman, impersonal standard of perfection that comes from nowhere, right? Like, versus, now I am perfectly growth oriented, perfectly. Like, this week I'm not, but last week I was, and next week I strive to be again. I strive to achieve perfection in the extent of my honest engagement with my life, including the mistakes that I make, right? I'm going to hold myself to that standard. And it's such a lofty standard, and it's an achievable one. And I've achieved it sometimes, and sometimes I haven't, but I'm going to really be shooting for it, right? Or I'm like getting closer and closer to where I really do, that I don't have big lapses in my growth orientation, right?
Yeah. These days I developed a habit of waking up every day and reading to myself, well, a few sentences, but first one is, I'm committed to getting better every day by putting in the work, right? Yeah. And so I know that life will bring me a lot of challenges, and I'm going to come short, but I commit to doing my best in whatever situation comes.
And like, to me, that's perfection. Like, just plain and simple. That's like, that is a life perfectly lived, to the extent that, do you know what I mean? Like, just a different concept of perfection entirely. That's not about trying to like hold yourself to some fixed, impossible, image in your head of some like inhuman, godlike person, but rather like an excellent life, a full life, a life that you're making the most of, including all the wrinkles and all the problems and all the setbacks and all the mistakes. And like, to me, that's perfect. Do you know what I mean? Like, and worth striving for.
Yeah, Gena, I wanted to transition, as we're going to wrap up soon, to a little bit more like into your personal life and your toolkits for, I'm sure, you study, psychology, and you coach founders, and, you write and talk about psychological, growth, perfection, work on ourselves. So I'm curious, what do you personally do, maybe daily, weekly, or on some regular basis to build those, qualities and live those aspirations yourself? What are some
I
of
love
the
it.
like core practices?
Sure. I mean, and then I do write about them for what it's worth. So I'm pretty open, try to wear my own, psychological issues and growth on my sleeve. So if you read, there's an old piece in Psychology Today called What It Really Looks Like to Rebuild Your Soul, maybe something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You can,
Haven't read that
I'm
one.
sure, so Gena Gorlin, Psychology Today, What It Really Looks
Mm-hmm.
Like, it should pull it up.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so I kind of disclose a bunch of my imperfections in that piece. But to answer your question about like now, right, at this point in my life. So it's really different pre versus post being a parent, for one
Mm-hmm.
thing. And in glorious ways and in, complicated and exhausting ways. It's very different in terms of like, yeah, what is my self-care routine? Like, and how do I sort of build and maintain my own builder's mindset? I
Yeah.
mean, so here are the fundamental ways that I build and maintain my builder's mindset. I surround myself with exemplars, with
Mm-hmm.
people who call me out, people who inspire me, people who are, to my mind, really like inspiring builders in their whole approach to life. I married one. So that's probably one of the biggest ways, honestly, for me. Again, this is not going to be
Mm-hmm.
everyone's approach. Like you're
Yes,
asking me
of
about
course.
me. So I'm not talking about
Yes.
just me, not saying
Yes,
everyone
just
do this.
you.
So like for me, and I'm someone, like if you read that article, you'll see like I have a history of being very anxiously attached and sort of depending too much on other people's validation and sort of being held back by that in various ways. And so I both befriended a couple of crucial people who they give me the visibility I need, the connection that I need, and they don't indulge me even for a second on the kind of insecure, like validation seeking that
Mm-hmm.
would easily like get reinforced and inflamed again. It's like a cancer in remission that I have to constantly like that I have to periodically go and have scans done to make sure it hasn't
Mm-hmm.
like remetastasized. And the big way that I do that is by the people I surround myself
Yeah.
with and people I don't surround myself with who I know, oh no, yeah, they're just going to feed the crap out of this for me. So that's one
Mm-hmm.
huge way.
Yeah.
And another huge way for me is just like art. I mentioned I was
Yeah.
always very, artistic and I was a kind of sensitive soul
A lot
and,
of heart around you.
yeah. And so like, and this is kind of a sad thing again with pre versus post parenting. I used to swing dance a lot. I mean, not
Mm-hmm.
a lot to the extent of people who get really, really good. I never got really, really good, but I was okay. And I was okay enough that I could really like dance with some amazing dancers and like keep up and really enjoy it. And it gave me the whole combination of exercise and artistic expression and human connection and all kind of
Mm-hmm.
in one fell swoop. And it was stylistically like very much kind of aligned with my spirit. Like just swing dance music is kind of big band era. Anyway, I could go on and on about the particulars of that, but like it fed my soul. And
Mm-hmm.
today I have other forms of that are kind of lazier in to account for the fact that I'm twice over a mom, but I
Yeah.
hope to get back to swing dancing someday. But like, I insist on watching an episode of TV most evenings with my poor husband, who would much rather just never have to watch an episode of TV for the rest of his life. And kind of, I mean, he likes movies, but TV is a waste of time. But like, he'll indulge me on that
What's your
because I do
favorite?
get something out of it. Oh my gosh, we could go on. Like the latest. So right now, we just finished the latest season of Only Murders in This Building, which I enjoy for a variety of reasons. Not least of which is just like it's in Manhattan. It's just like the
Mm-hmm.
Upper West Side where I spent 4 years living with my family, and I miss
Mm-hmm.
it. Now I'm in Austin, Texas for various reasons.
Yeah.
So it's like nostalgic. And anyway, there are lots of different reasons. I like the kind of the
Cool.
particular way the
I'm a
characters
Star Trekkie.
also, I mean, like the next generation got me through a very difficult and important period of growth in my life. I would
Yes.
just
I
like
can
go
relate.
and I would have some Moscato. I would have one glass of Moscato and watch an episode of TNG
Yeah.
and would get that need met for just like, okay, I've reoriented myself to and it's a lot of they're super sciencey, but also
Philosophical.
ambitious and
Yeah.
practical and philosophical, and right, you can see how, oh yeah, these are a lot of my values kind of reflected back to me in the form of this narrative. And I love stories, I love narrative, so that those are a lot of the things. And then I periodically journal. That's one of my major. Again, I've kept a diary all through the really hard teen years that would have, I don't know, been impossible otherwise, and I return to it as needed.
Do you have specific form or just free form? What comes to your mind?
Depends on what I need at a given time of life. Like there were years and years where I had a specific, I kept what I called an honesty log, which was sort of the origin of a lot of the stuff I now, I've written about self-honesty. And it came entirely out of my own experience and practice, where I would, at the end of every day, I had a set of prompts, basically like, what have I been lying to myself about? And sort of like, what do I want to come clean about? And then in particular, have I been in people mode today? And that was my shorthand for I'm preoccupied with impression management. I'm preoccupied with trying to prove something to someone else, whether out here or even in my head, versus I'm kind of mindfully oriented to my own first personal perspective and actually trying to establish what I believe is true, or experience the thing I'm experiencing for myself, rather than kind of through this external monitor that is judging me within my own head, and I'm trying to be a certain way for them or prove something to them. So that was people mode. So I would have my own little check. How have I been in people mode? And then just how intentional have I been today? It was a huge one for me. So for a while I would have these personalized prompts, and they were game changing in terms of just getting me focused on the things that I was trying to check and improve in my own psychology. And it was years in the making until I felt like I didn't need to do it every day anymore. Then I had my kind of biannual checks. Now I do it every year at New Year's, because that still has this kind of symbolic significance to me. But again, I also have a husband and some very good friends who just will call me out immediately, if I'm going into some sort of weird la la land, or if I'm being kind of defensive or pushy, or they just won't stand for it. And so in a way, they now serve as my externalized journal buddies, which is really nice. If you can get yourself, some of those, I highly recommend it.
Yes, social circle is powerful. Yeah, that's there's famous phrase: surround yourself or five
people you are the 5 people you spend the most time with. I come back to that wisdom again. There's something very deeply true.
Yeah, we adapt ourselves, I believe, to people around us, so more powerfully than to anything else. So, Gena, is there anything else that you'd like to cover? I know we're at the end of the hour, running out of time, and you're super busy. If there's anything else that you'd like to mention right now, let me know. Or if not, then please do share all the ways our listeners can connect with your work. I know you have a podcast. I believe you co-hosted the Founders Mindset, blog, Building the Builders, and then community, right? Also,
that's
coaching.
That's pretty much. I think you've got most of them. Yeah. Thank you for doing your homework so diligently. That's awesome.
For sure, it was my pleasure. So I was just curious about what you do, how you do it. I'm learning a lot from you. So I'm gonna link those resources. Maybe if you could provide me the link with the coaching, where exactly people should go and can go. Any other social media channels where you are the most active and people could send you a message?
Sure. And so I'm semi-active on Twitter, not as active as the people who are really active on Twitter, but I try to at least that's where I will usually announce a new Substack post, whereas I don't really do that anymore on any of the other social media. And I also have some pieces in Every, which is a business publication, a couple of which are kind of some of my key pieces on the psychological tools founding that aren't on my Substack. They're on Every. So if you go to, I think it's every.to/Gena Gorlin. Does that work? No, that doesn't work. So I will provide the link. Oh, every.to/
I know where you are on Every, and I can just I found you at Gena.Gorlin.
It's at Gena. Every.to/@Gena.Gorlin. So,
Yeah, I'm gonna link that.
and then if anyone really wants to deep dive, I've got a bunch of talks and interviews on YouTube that I've roughly organized into a channel that I don't really advertise that widely. So if anyone's like really motivated to hear more, Gena,
gonna find it.
you can find it there, or you can just put my name into YouTube and you'll see a bunch of stuff. But look out for my book in the next few years. But it'll be a while in the making.
You never know, probably. With the AI, maybe soon.
I thought about that, but I don't think we're quite there yet. Maybe it'll get there. It can just be my co-author. But in the meantime, thank you so much for having me and for your really thought-provoking questions. This has been really fun. I feel like I probably learned a bunch just by hashing these topics out with you. So that's always a good success signal for me.
I mean, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, for your work, like so much of it, I'm just absorbing, and it helps me again to shape my work as a coach. I also work with founders, but in a different way, not a psychologist. But what else? Is there anything like a parting thought that you'd like to leave our founders with? If not, that's okay. But if there is anything like a sentence that you'd like to finish off our podcast, to inspire maybe, or to provoke thinking in a certain direction, let me know.
Ooh, now I really wish I had this, like I had a prepared statement like that. I guess I'll just say what kind of comes to mind if I'm speaking directly to the founders out there. We see you, we see the best within you, and we're rooting for it. And that best within you deserves to live. Don't cut it short, or don't cut it small. Don't try to downsize yourselves for the rest of us, because we want you whole.